Yeah, so as I said, my name is Moses. I come from Zambia, and I work with the Theological University, where I teach development studies. That's my specialty. Besides that, I also am a leader of the Reformed Church in Zambia, but also the president of the Council of Churches in Zambia. We coming to the United States with a mission to try to raise awareness to the U.S. populace, particularly people from the churches, and we have a privilege to meet you from the environmentalists as well, about what is happening, the impacts of climate change and global warming in Africa, and through you to try to lobby your government to act to avert this catastrophe that is really affecting us in Africa so negatively. We have been speaking to various groupings around, and we are happy that to a great extent the number of people that we have met, in one or the other, they seem to know about what is happening. They seem to agree that there is something wrong that is happening, but perhaps they haven't really fully understood the impact this is having, especially on human beings in Africa. And so we are talking much about the human impacts that this has on the lives in Africa, and hoping that something can be done to try to avert the situation. Generally in Africa, there is a genuine understanding about climate change, especially among the people that are a bit educated. It's different. When we talk about education in Africa, it's not as much as you people here, where most of the population here are quite educated. Back home, we still have a lot of illiteracy among the folk. And I come from a country where the total population is about 13 million people. 13 million people, and out of those 13 million people, we are talking about 65% living in poverty. And when we talk about poverty, we're not talking about anything less, but something that is very severe, because they are living on less than $1 a day. To survive, it takes them less than $1 a day. And this is the bigger part, more than half the population of the country. And if we are to go further to look at that statistic, it's even worse in the rural parts. And by that, it also means that most of them cannot afford to send their children to school. And this creates a bit more challenges that are there. But also, it's a part of the continent that bears the greater brunt of HIV/AIDS. The sub-Saharan Africa is really greatly impacted and affected by HIV/AIDS. My own country has got a prevalence rate of about 14%. That's an annual aggregate. Wow. That national aggregate, 14% of our population are living with HIV/AIDS. And of that 14%, the bigger part is women. So we're having about, especially the ages between the ages 15 to 49, the most hit, and we're experiencing so many deaths that are there coming out each year. And we are also having a situation where in this part of the country, unemployment levels are very high, because our economies are not well developed. Here you might be struggling with a 9% or so. I'm not very precise about your percentage of unemployment. There we're talking about 70% or so. Because out of the 13 million people that we have, only 600,000 are in informal employment. Only 600,000 out of that, less than a million. So you can see how much that is affecting us to a great extent. Now, talking about what is happening, basically, countries like Zambia and Malawi are countries that have their total dependence on agriculture as their means of livelihood, especially in the rural folk. It is worse for Malawi. Zambia is much better because we have some copper. and that has been the main stay of our economy in the country, although it has had its own challenges in the recent past. But majority of the folk are in agriculture for their livelihoods, and that agriculture is not mechanized. It's poorly mechanized. Most of them are peasant farmers, and they depend on the rain in order for them to produce their crops. And the things that have happened in the recent past are directly impacting on the lives of the rural folk especially. And this has got an impact on other sectors of the economy, but also on the general life of the people. And these are the things that sometimes when we hear the politics that are going around the issues of climate change, and when there is the talk about reducing the emissions and the like, we get surprised, because here it's about debates about politics, debates about economics, but there it's debates about life, a chance to live. And this is what is happening. On average, our rain pattern is such that it will start about end of October, and it will end somewhere in about April. And we expect that people would have grown their crops and then had their food. And our staple food is made of cornmeal. It's called nshima, the ground cornmeal, and then we make nshima pulp, as they call it in South Africa. That's our main food. And people grow that first and foremost for food. And then secondly, they grow that for to raise income, to send their children to school and to do other economic activities. And with the rain patterns that have been happening in the recent past, things have changed. I received this morning an email from my sister back in Zambia telling me that it is still very hot this time in Zambia, when it's supposed to be rainy and the temperatures are supposed to be lowering because of the rains. But it is still very hot, and the rains haven't yet started. We don't know when they are going to come. And if they were to come, we don't know when they are going to stop. And so people are not sure when to start preparing the crops. They are not sure when they are going to harvest their crops. And these are things that are happening every day. So as a result, we are seeing a constant decline in terms of food production, especially among the peasant farmers. The unfortunate part is that sometimes when you get our statistics from Africa, like Zambia has been projecting a bumper harvest of maize corn now and again, you see it on the internet, because our politicians have to portray an image that things are happening. But those are the few commercial farmers that we have in the country that are able to produce those corns, and they come up with a bumper harvest. And that is not it's not coming from the peasant farmers, who have to find other ways of survival. Now, what is happening in that particular case? I have my personal example. Apart from what I do to lecture in the Invest College, I also do a bit of farming just to supplement my income. And last year I had a terrible experience. I planted my field with the hope that I'll raise some income at the end of the year. And it so happened that when I planted my cornfield in March, in December, by the time we're getting to February, the rains had stopped, and they never came back, and I lost my entire crop in that particular season. But fortunate with me is that I have a paycheck that I get from my work in the Invest College. But there are many other folks whose only source of livelihood is the field like that one. And it means that they have nothing to live on, and they have to find other ways of living in order to survive. And many people have not seen the relationship between what is happening to the environment and what is happening in other sectors of our lives. When we talk about HIV/AIDS being at 14%, one has to look at what are the pushing factors that are contributing to that. And one of the pushing factors is the loss of livelihoods by the people, especially in the rural areas, because they cannot feed themselves any longer. Their young young men and women are moving into the city, to try to find other ways of raising income to support their families back home in the villages, but also to survive themselves. And when they move into the city, they find a hostile environment that cannot absorb them in the formal employment sector. They cannot afford to pay for decent accommodation. So they live in slums with poor sanitation. And with poor sanitation, it means that other diseases like cholera become the order of the day. Other diseases like malaria become the order of the day because things are not just okay there. And then some of the people that are not strong enough, they will end, especially the young men, they end up into drug dealing or drug abuse. And we are having a situation where if this is not controlled now, the country is going to be lost in the next few decades. Because more and more young people are in drugs. They are not going to school. They are not being employed. And what next do we expect? So many things that are going to come out of that. And most of our young ladies, they have to survive. And the means of survival, they don't have the education, they can't get jobs, it is prostitution. And there is this increasing rate of prostitution going on, not because they want it, but because they have to survive. And that means that HIV/AIDS is constantly getting on the increase in the country. And with this, there are issues that deaths are coming up, more people are dying, especially the productive sector of the economy. They're dying and so forth and so forth. And so these are things that are happening and are pushing people into very different situations. Now, our coming here is to, first and foremost, talk about the impacts, human impacts this is having. It is not something that is just happening and we just need to change our way of life, but there are human impacts. And some of the human impacts as they are now, they require assistance from developed economies to adapt. And the adaptation that we're talking about is first and foremost to help the people get their source of livelihood back. And how do we propose that to happen is that if people can help us again to reforest, to afforest our nations, because trees have been cut in order for people to survive. And we need to plant more trees that are going to absorb the excess gases in the environment, but also nitrogen-fixing trees in the soil, so that we can have our soils again productive. And people can go back to the land and produce food for themselves and be able to sell the excess foods that are there. That as one of the interventions that is urgently needed in our environment. But also we're talking about, is it possible for us to get assistance into getting clean energy sources like solar power. We do not have problems of the snow like you have here. Most of our people don't know how snow looks like, you know. But we have the abundance of the sun. And if there can be a lot of investment in that sector, and not investment meaning that you produce solar panels here and then you export them to Africa, but we're saying, can you come and build factories to produce solar panels in Africa? Because in so doing, you're making them cheaper because the cost of transportation is reduced, but also you're creating jobs for our people there, which is very, very important for our economies, so that we can be able to make these things affordable to as many people as possible, and so reduce the dependence on trees and other things that people are trying to use as a source of energy. So these are some of the things that we're talking about, that we need to move in and to help Africa live and live again. I think let me just end here so I can give my friend a bit of chance to speak as well.